last month I talked about rent structures. So this is for commercial space and tenants or landlords renting space. And I talked about rent structures. But you know what? There's a lot more to talk about. So I'm doing part 2 on rent structures. Stick around. Hi, welcome back. My name's Joe Brown. I am a commercial real estate specialist with Century 21, List with Beggins, located in Tampa. Thank you so much for being here with me today. So last month, as I said in the intro, last month I talked about rent structures. And so just to remind you that there's gross rent, triple net lease, and then modified, which is a combination of the two. But then there's something called CAM charges, CAM, which is common area maintenance. That applies to some buildings, maybe not all, but some. But landlords also have to concern themselves with that you have insurance and property tax, right? So now let's shift, because there's a couple other rent structures I want to share with you. And two of them are closely related. So one is called tiered lease. Okay, and so what that means is the base rent goes up. Is it every year? Every 5 years? Really depends on the lease, right? The lease drives everything. So just take for an example, base rent is $20. Well, a tiered lease would say, okay, after 2 years, that base rent is going to go up by 2%. So every 2 years, the base rent goes up 2%. Now, does it have to be 2%? No. Does it have to be every 2 years? No. I have seen leases that every year the base rent increases by a certain percent. I have seen some leases that the base rent stays the same for 5 years and then the bump happens. I've seen some which is the first 2 years or first 3 years is level, but then after that, the increases begin. So let's talk about why that would happen. So think about it from an investor standpoint. If I have a lump of money, and so in this case, I use it to buy a commercial property, and I have tenants paying rent, then I have an income from that rent. Or I could have put that money, let's say, into a mutual fund or into stocks or some other vehicle that is going to respond to the market. Well, if my base rent stays level with no increases, but inflation is higher, right? So well, we know just in the past few years, inflation hit 9%. So as an investor, I'm losing money by keeping rents level. Does that make sense? So that's why landlords will build in a tiered system that base rent will go up either every year, every few years, every 5 years, every 10 years. And all that is negotiated prior to the lease, right? So if there's a property and a tenant is interested, we do a letter of intent, right? You're interested in the property. And then we work out the specifics, work out the logistics of the lease, right? So that's the tiered, that there's a step increase set by time and percent. Now that step increase can, not always, but can apply to the CAM charges, right? Because if you're using a janitorial service, they may charge more. A landscape service may charge more. Insurance probably will go up, right? Property tax could go up. So all those factors increase. And so many times leases will not only have a step increase in the base rent, but also a step increase in the expense side, right? Whether it's CAM charges or triple net charges. So that's the tiered step. Now, very closely associated with the tiered step is a tiered step based on, if you want to call it CPI numbers or inflation numbers, right? And so, again, this is negotiated in the contract and in the lease. But let's say, so the tiered system, rent and base rent goes up a certain percent that's specified in the lease. Well, one based on inflation numbers, let's say inflation hits 5%, so the rate of increase in the lease would be 5%. And now, if inflation actually goes down, then rent stays level, right? And again, it could be negotiated that anything over, let's say, 2% inflation or 3% inflation, rent stays level. Anything over that level gets an additional charge, an additional step up. Again, all that, so that is a inflation-based tiered system. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. All that is negotiated in the lease, right? The lease drives everything. The third rent structure I want to talk about, so two of them are tiered, right? One is a fixed amount, one is based on inflation numbers. The third, and you really see this with retail numbers, is, how can I explain this? So let's say you have a retail shop. Your base rent may be $20 a square foot per year for the space. But then, if your business sells more than X amount, where do you figure X out? That's right, it's in the lease, right? So if your store sells more than $500,000, then in addition to the base rent, your rent becomes X amount of that amount over $500,000. Does that make sense? So let's say it's 0.25% over 500,000 would be the additional rent, or it could be 1%, 2%. How do we know what percent? That's right, it's in the lease, right? So the lease would be the base rent plus a percent of the revenues over a certain amount that's specified in the lease. And again, you really see this in retail settings. Now, why would landlords do that? Why would retail centers do that? Tenants, especially retail tenants, want to drive traffic to their store. Landlords want to increase rent, and they want to make their site attractive to attract more tenants and to attract people. And so if the store, if the center, whatever that retail space is, if it's driving traffic, that is the landlord's job to make the site, the area attractive to draw people to come to that site. And so the theory is your sales have increased because the landlord has made the site attractive. Does that make sense? And so the landlord shares in and the revenue's over a certain amount. So that is a rent structure. I personally have not seen very much of that. I know it exists, and I understand the thinking behind there. So again, this is a short video. Last month, I talked about the different rent structures. I'll put a link to that video at the end of this if you want to go back and watch this. And this week, I just wanted to talk about the tiered system, and then the I forget what it's called, but a revenue, a percent over certain revenue that you really find in retail settings. Before I close, let me just go back and talk about tiered rent one last time. It is not uncommon to have tiered rent. And I say that I was working with a client, very, very nice people, but they thought the landlord was trying to be tricky by building in this tiered system. And even when I tried to explain that's normal and that's a common practice, they just didn't like it. So it is normal, it is common, but again, all the specifics are worked out in the lease, okay? Thank you so much for being with me. Go to my website, my commercial site is joebrown-commercial.c21.com. You can look at some properties, you can search for properties, you can read my blogs. I'm here, I want to be your trusted advisor. So thank you very much for being here. If you have ideas about topics you want me to cover, please send me a message through my website. There's a contact me button, and I'll be glad to address those. So until next week, take care.